and so it is. Well, welcome again, everyone. Thank you all for being here with us today. We're truly delighted for each and every one who participates, who tunes in at time shifting, however we get this message. We're truly delighted that you're with us. I want to start this morning with just a simple line from a poem by one of my favorite mystics. We call him Rumi here in the United States. Rumi was a Sufi mystic, lived around the year 1300 in Afghanistan. You may be familiar with the whirling dervishes in the Sufi tradition, and Rumi is considered the founder of that. To him, it kind of represented our place in the universe, I think, moving but staying in one place. The divine is eternally changing but is eternally the same. One hand down and one hand up as we receive and we give. An integral part of this universe. How beautiful is that? If we could just ponder how beautiful is that to know that we are an intimate, an important, an integral part of the universe. The poem that I'm referring to now is about a man who stayed too long at the tavern. Keep in mind, he's writing this around the year 1300. This man stayed too long at the tavern, and he's trying to make his way home in his intoxicated state. And he loses his house key. So he's down on his hands and knees, and he's under the street light, and he's searching for the key in the dirt. And the policeman comes along. And the policeman says to him, "What are you looking for?" And the man says, "Well, I dropped the key to my house. I need to find the key to my house so I can go to bed." And the policeman said, "Well, I'll help you look." He said, "Where did you lose it?" And he says, "Well, I dropped it by the door when I was trying to get in the door." And the policeman says, "Well, why are you out here in the street looking under the street light when the door's over there in the dark?" And in his drunken state, the man says, "Well, the light here is just so much better." I just love that because to me, it kind of epitomizes the journey of our soul, the human experience that we go through as we are in this life and don't quite understand how we got here, why we're here, where we're going, but we're seeking something. And not necessarily seeking in the right place, but seeking where it's convenient, where it's fun, where it's interesting, where the light is better. How many times do we do that? We go and we get distracted and we go, "Oh, I'll go look over here, I'll go look over there, I'll go to this seminar, I'll take this workshop, I'll read this book, I'll listen to this tape." We do all of those things. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. There's time, everything is perfect in its own time. But at some point we have to ask ourselves, are we looking in the right place? Do we even know what we're looking for? Are we looking earnestly? There's another bit of wisdom that comes to us from the East, and it's talking about the search for God. And it tells us, don't even bother going on this search for God unless you are seeking God as earnestly as you would be seeking a pond if your hair was on fire. Are we committed? Are we truly committed to finding that which we are seeking, that which we are searching for? And the question that we have to start with, I think, is why are we even searching? Why do we even have this idea that there's something seek, there's something to search for, there's something else. Why do we have that? Excuse me, I need a drink of water. We were out working in the yard all day yesterday, probably loaded up with pollen. Now, if you look back at the human condition, if you look back at recorded history, and usually we think recorded history it starts with writing. You know, we might say, well, our oldest written documents might go back, say, 4,000 years. But what about the cave paintings that are 40,000 years old? What about the people who drew those images on the walls of the caves? Is that not recorded history? And what are those images telling us? Joseph Campbell, in one of his lectures, was talking about visiting the caves in the south of France. And he said that he had gone into the great cathedrals in Paris. And there was a certain sense, a certain feeling that he got when being in that sacred geometry, you know, the shape of the building. There's so much that's put into that architecture that is lost on us in modern days. Just one example is that in the churches of olden times, there were two separate doors. There was a main entrance that those who were baptized would enter and exit. And then there was a side entrance, and this was for the people who were not yet baptized. And they would use the side entrance while they were coming in and taking instruction in classes and preparing for their conversion to that particular denomination. But once they were baptized, they no longer used that side door. They used the main entrance. And the symbolism there is that once they had become an adherent, once they had become baptized, you see that the church itself was their way of communing with the divine. That was all that they needed. Now, today, you know, in today's modern world, we might look at that and say, well, we don't quite see everything the same way. Today, we might find our communion with the divine closer at hand than in any particular building. But the symbolism was there, and the symbolism meant something to those people. Campbell also tells us that one of the things that has happened to us as humanity has evolved is we have lost touch with the significance of the mythologies of the world. You know? So these people painting the images on the walls of the cave, you know, some people say, well, it was common instructions for the hunters telling them how to approach the game and those kind of things. But if you look at those symbols, there's combinations there of a man or a human and an animal. There's combinations there of an animal and some type of a spirit. And there's a deeper significance there. There's a deeper meaning there. The people sensed something. They were trying to communicate something. And that something is lost upon us in today's world. So we don't relate to the old myths. We don't relate to the old symbolism, but the windows in the church buildings and the shape of the church buildings and the placements of the different special little rooms off to the side, all had significance to the people. And Campbell said when he was in the great cathedral in Paris, the great cathedrals in Paris, he had this sense of awe. He had this sense of other, this sense of it's more than just a building kind of that we get sometimes. And he said when he went to the caves in southern France and he entered into the cave and it had a very similar shape, you know, the domed ceiling of the cave, the flickering lights that were in there similar to the candle lights in the church. And he looked at the paintings on the wall, and what he took away from that was the same sense of awe and the same sense of connectedness, this feeling of something else that he experienced in the cathedral. He said, in his way of thinking, the caves were a place of worship, a place of where people would go and feel this sacredness and feel this connectedness. Now of course, that's his view, you know, and he may or may not be right, but I love it. It just kind of gives us this feeling that many thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of years ago, there was something in the human spirit that sensed a connectedness, a unity, a oneness with everything else, In our modern world, we are separated from nature. We are separated from even the very source, the very channel of our food. God is the only source. You know, but you take children today and ask them where chickens come from, and they'll likely say the supermarket, because that's their experience. You know. We've lost our connection. We've lost our roots, so to speak. But the important thing to know then is that as far back as we know, in terms of the human record, as far back as we know, human beings have been seeking this experience of this something, this isness, this suchness, this I amness, this oneness, whatever we choose to call it. And we have to ask ourselves then, why? Why are we seeking? Why does it seem to be part of the human psyche, the human experience? Why are we seeking, you know? I know I mentioned a few months ago I attended a video conference. There's a Native American Studies Center here in Lancaster, South Carolina. And once a month they have a lunch and learn, and you know, you can join in through Zoom, and they'll have somebody give a talk or a lecture or presentation on some different aspect of archaeology, Native American history, those sorts of things. And one month it was on the mythologies of the native peoples, and of course I love that stuff, you know. And I tuned in, and there was a lady speaking who was an elder here of the Catawba Nation, which the Catawba Nation Reservation is just 10 miles from here. I ride my motorcycle out through there. And she related the creation myth. I'll call it that. She called it the story of the first woman, right? And she told the story of the first woman, or the first woman in her culture. And I was watching this and listening to this, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, you know, this is like the Garden of Eden set in a different culture, you know. So I asked the question. I had a little chat box, and I asked the question, and I said, you know, does this story, as you related it, did it predate European contact? And I'm thinking, well, maybe the missionaries came over and they're telling the story of Adam and Eve, and somehow that got rolled up into the creation mythology of the native peoples. And she said, oh, absolutely, this predates Adam and Eve. She said, this has been told in our culture for 10,000 years. And you know, I said, well, the similarities between this and creation myths of other cultures, not just the story of the Garden of Eden, but other cultures, the similarities are just striking. And one of the professors somewhere, I can't remember where he was from, but he jumped in and he says, well, you know, the human brain is constructed in a similar manner all over the world. There's no reason that we wouldn't come up with the same stories. And of course, I wasn't on camera, and I had, you know, he couldn't see me chuckle, and it's, you know, explain that. Why would the human brain create a flood myth? in different cultures around the world? Why would the human brain create myths that have such similarities in different places around the world? It's a plausible explanation, but I don't know that it's a provable explanation. And there might be other explanations. So we take a step back now, take a step back in terms of evolution. Where we are right now is that there's something about being a human being that has seeking, an awareness that there's more, that there's so much more than we appear to be. There's this awareness. And we desire to experience that. We grow up in an urban environment. As I say, we've lost contact with the earth, with nature itself. But people who lived in closer contact, they were one. They were literally one with the environment. They weren't separate from it or apart from it. They were an integral part of it. They understood the cycles of life and of death and of birth and of rebirth. They understood these things. In ancient Egypt, there was a religion that built their temples in the form of a cow. So as in the medieval Christian churches, people went in through the main entrance of the church and came out of the main entrance of the church. In this religion, these people entered into the cow. And we look at that and we would say, well, these people were superstitious. You know, they thought God was a cow. But that's not the case. The cow represented the deep mystery of life itself. It took in grass at one end and put out milk at the other. Milk that fed human babies. Through the cow, the grass became food for the humans. Many years ago, Lori and I subscribed to Organic Gardening magazine, and there was a gentleman in there named Yule Gibbons who wrote an article more or less about getting back to nature. And I remember one month, I still remember it, he started off and he said, I have great news for everybody who lives in suburbia. There's an easy way to convert your lawn clippings into milk. And he said, all you need is a cow and a pail. You know. We lose sight of that. We lose sight of the miracle. Who amongst us would know how to take grass and turn it into milk for a baby? But there's some intelligence in the universe that knows how to do that. That does that. And we are part of that. And these people who built their temples in the form of a cow knew that. They knew that. But if we back up before even we can envision that human consciousness as we know it, as limited as it is, and keep that in mind, as limited as it is, before this level of awareness that we call human even appeared on this planet, even became visible on this planet, there was something that was seeking. Something that was seeking. Why? Not how, but why did the chemicals of the ocean form single-celled animals? Why? What purpose? What purpose was that? Everything in life seems to have a purpose. And from the view of evolution, we would say, well, that the purpose of life is to live. The purpose of life is to continue life. The purpose of life is to evolve into that form which is most likely to survive. Right? Why? why? Why do the chemicals in seawater care? Why would they even care? Why would they even bother? So then you say, well, it's an accident. It's just some sort of an accident. Maybe a lightning bolt came and landed in the primordial soup that we call the seas, and somehow that caused the chemicals to interact, and boom, they formed life. Perhaps. Perhaps that's how. Perhaps that's how it happened. But why? Why did it happen, you see? And why did those single-celled animals continue to evolve into multi-celled animals? And why did the multi-cells become specific organs, and so on and so on and so on? Why? I grew up on a bay in New York City, Jamaica Bay, and there were sandbars, big islands that were just sandbars, actually dredgings, where the dredges came through and pumped sand out of the channel and made these big sandbars. And when I was a kid, and then later as a teenager, we used to go out there in the boats. You would go up to the shore and drop anchor and wade ashore and set your blanket, and the little kids could go out and swim in the water. It was very shallow, And there was certain times of the year, it was just filled with horseshoe crabs. So what the adults would have to do is they would go out into the water and reach down and pick up the horseshoe crabs. You pick them up by the tail and take them and throw them someplace else. Just kind of move them in the water so that this little beach area where the kids would be playing would be clear of the crabs. Because what happens is the crabs put their tail straight up like that when they feel threatened. And the kids could accidentally step on that. It was like a spike. Very painful. So the adults would go through and they would move the horseshoe crabs out of the way. And there were thousands of horseshoe crabs on this sandy beach. And they would actually crawl up out of the water, and they would go into a shallow part, and they would bury themselves in the sand, and that's how they bred. They would bury themselves in pairs. They would mate and bury themselves in the soil. And sometimes you could actually find them. You could see their shells sticking up out of the sand. And we didn't think much of it, We just thought, well, these are horseshoe crabs, and you got to move them out of the way so you don't step on them. That was the utilitarian mindset that the human beings have. And later I found out that the horseshoe crab is one of the oldest living species on Earth. It's prehistoric. One of the oldest living species on Earth. In fact, it is so old that its immune system is so perfected that they use the blood of horseshoe crabs to test medicine for contaminants. There are people who live along the intercoastal waterway in the mud flats and the marshes, and how they make their living is they go out and they collect horseshoe crabs. They fill their boat up with horseshoe crabs, and they take the horseshoe crabs to a lab and they sell them. And the lab has a non-lethal way of extracting blood. They put a needle into a vein in the horseshoe crab and they extract the blood. And the horseshoe crab's blood is blue, not red, blue. And they extract this blood from the horseshoe crab. And then what they do is they will take, the horseshoe crabs are then returned to the wild where they can continue their life. But they take a drop of a batch of medicine, insulin, any kind of medicine that they're working with, and they just drop it into that horseshoe crab blood. And if there's any contaminants at all in that batch of medicine, the antibodies in the horseshoe crab blood will immediately begin to attack it. And they know that the batch is contaminated and they get rid of it. So my point is this: if the horseshoe crab has been around for bazillions of years, and it is one of the most survivable species on the planet of the Earth, if its blood system has evolved to the point where it will detect almost any contaminant that we put into it and it will destroy it, why did life have to evolve any further if the purpose of evolution is simply to live? It would seem that the horseshoe crab is the perfect expression of survivability. So there's something else, you see. There must be something else. Why did the mineral seek to become the plant? Why did the mineral seek to become the animal? Why did the animal seek to become human? What is it that is compelling? What is it that is compelling chemicals to take on life? Now, scientists might tell us how that happens, and they're still looking for hows, and we'll always be looking for hows, and it's wonderful because I think as we explore further and further and further back into that, we just become more and more and more amazed at how magnificent this life is, you know. I mean, who amongst us can go take a handful of dirt out there and somehow bring it to life, you know, Frankenstein's dream? We can't do that. So what the deep thinkers tell us is that life did not evolve from the minerals, but life was always in the minerals. And that what we are seeing is not evolution from, but evolution of. That consciousness, and this comes to us from the East as well. Instead of the fall of humanity being like the Garden of Eden, being kicked out of the garden, that consciousness, the consciousness of the divine, descended down and cloaked itself into matter, and then evolved itself into an intelligence capable of seeking. And not only seeking, but of finding. So we can, in our human arrogance, we can say, well, life evolved to the pinnacle of mankind. We came from the tiniest single-celled animal in the ocean, and we evolved through all of the different billions of years and different species and apes, and then finally we became human. And that is as good as it gets, you see. That is as good as it gets. That's in our arrogance, we would say that. Look at me, I'm the best that there is. Now, I would say we'd have to go back and say there's some kind of an impulse there. There's something that is propelling this constant forward movement. All right? You can see that. We have earth and we have water, and then somehow we have single-celled organisms, and somehow we have multi-celled organisms, and somehow we have plants, and somehow we have animals that walk, we have animals that crawl, we have animals that fly, we have animals that swim. We have animals with some degree of intelligence and awareness, but not self-awareness, but awareness. And then we have us. What is it that makes the human consciousness different? I think the first thing to say is, I don't know that the consciousness itself is different, but it is expressing itself at a different degree of awareness. A different degree of awareness. So the horseshoe crab is. Does the horseshoe crab know that it is? We don't know. We don't know that. Does the amoeba know that it is? We don't know that. Does it know that it's alive? Does it know that someday it will die? We doubt that. Now there are some animals that we know as you get into more and more, I would say more and more aware animals. For example, elephants. Elephants seem to be aware of death. If they find the bones of a deceased elephant, they do some sort of a ritual. They change their behavior, may be the best way to say it. You've probably seen the posts that go around on Facebook from time to time about a man in Africa who protected the elephants, and when he died, the elephants came to the house as if they were mourning his death. Some animals mourn, some animals grieve. We've seen stories in the news over the last couple of years about a mother kill a whale whose calf died, and she mourned for 2 weeks, keeping the calf with her. So there's some sense of awareness of death amongst some animals. But human beings seem to be very keenly aware of the transitory nature of this life. So we are aware of who we are, or at least what we are, and yet we keep seeking. We keep seeking. Why are we seeking? Why are we seeking? Some will say, well, we're seeking because we want to escape the inevitability of death. So we create this fantasy world where we are immortal beings. That's plausible. I don't know that it's provable, but it's plausible. But another alternative is that we are seeking because there is that which has caused us to seek. That which we are seeking is seeking us, that we have been created to come into this point of self-awareness, and in using our ability to be self-aware, we become aware of a different self, a higher self, or a self with a capital S, right? So this is where you see self-realization fellowship. You used to see those ads in the magazines. You probably still see them. Our journey seems to be from the chemical, the life in the chemicals, in the minerals, that is seeking itself, that is seeking the experience of itself as us and through us in some unique way. Each of us is a unique, individualized expression of it looking for itself in some unique, individual way. So now, like the people who at one point in our history, and I'm sure there are still people today who live in community, communing with nature, awareness of nature, aware of the cycles of nature, you know. We are aware that there is something so much more. Life evolved to this point of human awareness. Life didn't evolve from the chemicals and the minerals, but it evolved in them because it was there all along. It created them. And now we come to the point and say, wait a second. Is being human and self-aware as far as this goes? Is this it? Is this as good as it gets? And we start to realize that the collective answer in the human experience is no. There is more. There is a higher self. There is a spiritual self. There is an immortal self. There is a self that has ways of knowing of which we know not. There is a self that is connected to all of life. And it is causing us to seek. What is it that we are seeking? We are seeking fulfillment. Self-actualization, as Maslow called it. The realization of our full potential. That's what we are seeking. We may be seeking it in many other ways. We may be like the drunk under the streetlight, looking for it in power, looking for it in money, looking for it in positions, looking for it in hobbies, looking for it in all these different things that distract us. But no matter what we get, we're never fulfilled, you see. You give somebody $100 million and they'll want $200 million. Give them the power to rule a country and they want to rule the world, you see. St. Paul said, what does it gain me to win the whole world if I can't find my own soul? Fulfillment, the experience of this unity, the experience of this oneness with this isness, this I amness, this suchness, this perfect love that we call God. That's what we were seeking. And when we realize that, then we can look at all of these other activities that we give our time to and ask ourselves, how do they help us to move into the fullness of our potential, into the fullness of the experience of God? Augustine wrote, I ask nothing of thee, not even thy love. I only want thee. And this was a man who spent many years giving us rules and regulations about what we could do, what we could not do, what we should do, what we should not do. And then he says, finally, I view it as he matured, as his consciousness matured, he said, finally, we have one commandment. Love and do what you will. Love and do what you will. I ask nothing of thee, not even thy love. I only want thee. I only want the conscious experience of this unity. As Dr. Holmes tells us, the conscious realization of the experience of the presence and the activity of the divine in our lives, the mystical unity, the mystical experience. Why are we seeking? Well, we've been born to seek. We have been created to seek. The divine has cleared its throat while playing hide and seek, causing us to look for it. And the divine does not mock itself, does not mock its children, does not mock its own creation. It would not give us the desire to seek if there were not something to find, not something to find. When we are thirsty, we desire to drink. And the process of drinking is good for us. Now, you and I can choose to drink things that are good for us or drink things that are not so good for us. But the desire of thirst in itself is not a bad desire. In the West, we have learned that all pain and suffering is the result of desire, which comes to us from Buddhism, which is true. But we have become confused and said that means we must be rid of all desires. And as I told you, the Hindu philosopher once said, well, isn't the desire to have no desire still a desire? And I cracked up. Right? The simplicity of the statement made me realize how crazy our worldview in here in the West is. The desire of thirst causes us to engage in a process which can be good for us or can be not good for us, depending on how we choose to try to satiate that desire. The desire for food, hunger, also causes us to do something that may be good for us. See? May cause us to eat healthy food, develop healthy bodies, experience the world in a healthy way. And this desire to know God, this desire to seek in a similar fashion, can lead us toward fulfillment or lead us to distraction. We have to choose wisely. We have to make that evaluation. We have to be aware, and then we have to choose. We have to choose widely. So if we take a step back and we look at this whole experience, this whole experience on planet Earth, from the day that this glob of molten lava cooled enough to start to form a crust and soil and plants and animals and those things. Life has been pushing forward to a greater experience of itself. And now we come to a realization that it does not end at the human experience. That the destiny, if you will call it that, is to continue to evolve beyond the human level of experience, beyond mind, which is a tool that has helped us to know, but at some point that tool becomes useless because there are things that cannot be known by logic and reason. That there is an experience beyond mind. There is an experience beyond the physical. There is the experience of perfect unity, which is love. Which is love. Not human transactional love, not human romantic love, not human transitional love, but unconditional. Unconditional love. The divine has created us out of itself, for itself. When I was a little boy learning catechism in first grade, they would the catechism basically means they give you the question and give you the answer. That's the method of instruction. Why did God create you? And in unison, all the good little boys and girls, we would respond. God created us to know Him, to love Him, to serve Him, and to be happy with Him for eternity. Still remember that, all those many years ago. It's so simple. It had a very simplistic meaning to me as a child. I simply repeated the answer by rote because I didn't comprehend what that meant. But I look back on that after all of these years and I say, that's pretty simple. It's got it. The divine has created you and I out of itself to come to know it, to come to experience it, to come to love it now and forever. And the only place that we will find that is within. Is within. Distractions tell us it's out there. It's out there somewhere. It's in a church building somewhere. It's in a workshop somewhere. It's in a book somewhere. It's in a tape somewhere. Now, all of those things are tools to help us come to the realization that it's not out there. It's in here. And to find it, to experience it, we must learn to be still and know. We must learn to let the chatter of the mind quiet. We must learn not to get distracted by every thought that comes to us. And we must learn to just simply be at home with the beloved. Take a deep step back. For billions and billions of years, the divine has lovingly and patiently been working itself out through evolution to produce a being capable of self-awareness and self-choice and will and volition. And once Consciousness has arrived at that point, which is us. It requires our cooperation. Life worked itself out from the amoeba to the human. Life worked itself out by itself. But now, we must willingly and consciously and deliberately participate. I just read something this morning that said that this awareness, this shift in consciousness to aligning with the divine occurs in two ways. A revolutionary personal effort or an evolutionary effort. For billions of years, the evolutionary effort has slowly been moving us into this point of realization. If we wish to advance faster than the speed of evolution, we must have a revolutionary personal experience. We must commit ourselves to the discovery as much as we would commit ourselves to a pond if our hair was on fire. We must stop looking under the streetlight because it's easier. And we must go and look within where we are sure to find. Divine love has created you out of itself to discover itself and to live its life as you and through you. Surrender to that. There's no escaping it, and there's only avoiding it and delaying it. So I invite you today, surrender to that. All of God's love is with you, and so it is. And